Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely pumped you're joining us today because we're unpacking a truly fascinating idea from our sources. We're looking at a wild architectural parallel that actually traces a path from colonial history straight into the future of our digital infrastructure. So, what does a horseback ride in 1775 have to do with modern AI? I know, it sounds like a massive leap, but stick with me here. Our sources argue that looking closely at the historical grounding of this specific event uncovers a very real, practical blueprint for reclaiming our modern digital independence. We're jumping right into the thick of it with this exact quote from Paul Revere's third written account of his mission to Lexington. He wrote, "I set off upon a very good horse." Now, the researchers don't just treat this as some neat piece of colonial trivia. They frame Revere's exact account as an 18th century data availability layer. By writing this down, he made his metabolic intent permanently verifiable. He proved the actual physical sweat and energy he burned to accomplish the task, essentially publishing his protocol right into the public domain. This brings us to a really interesting philosophical concept called haxiety. Yeah, it's a big word, but it basically defines the absolute, undeniable thisness of a physical event. True sovereign action requires an undeniable physical reality. We're talking about a specific man on a specific horse at exactly 10 p.m. in the real world. This totally contrasts with a probabilistic AI just sitting in the cloud, blindly guessing at answers in what the researchers call an automated miasma. Haxiety proves the action actually happened. Moving on to Section 1, the Royalist Cloud Enclosure. Let's explore how massive tech monopolies are currently threatening that exact, localized physical reality. The sources impartially frame the modern push for centralized cloud computing as a massive infrastructural power grab. They actually call it the restoration of agentic kingship. Instead of computing being this decentralized tool that you run locally, it's being enclosed and turned into a metered utility. This forces what's termed an interface inversion, meaning instead of you managing the tool, the centralized machine effectively manages you, dictating the exact terms of your execution. And this perfectly illustrates the clash happening right now. On one side, we have royalist compute, this centralized cloud empire where users are reduced to passive digital tenants, basically just renting the right to think, while trapped in a guessing fog. On the exact opposite side, you have Republican compute, which the sources also refer to as artificial life. This model relies entirely on local hardware execution. It offers deterministic precision and puts you firmly back in the pilot seat. Section 2, Record versus the Substrate. So, how do we actually go about bridging our human intent into the physical world? Well, this leads us to the fundamental dialectic of the record versus the substrate. Using a really specific metaphor from a museum exhibit at the Paul Revere House, the sources contrast a delicate, cream-colored text panel against a rough, red brick wall. The cream panel represents the record. That's our human intent, the unalterable software protocol, our abstract desires. But that panel is bolted directly to the red brick wall, which represents the substrate, the unyielding physical hardware and the forensic floor needed to execute it. The key takeaway here is non-separability. You simply cannot separate your abstract human mission from the physical hardware required to run it without entirely losing your sovereignty. Now, what's really fascinating is how perfectly the 1775 physical protocol translates into the modern requirement for local hardware execution. Dr. Warren's historical orders map directly to our modern human intent and protocol. The horse, that's the physical hardware substrate. Paul Revere is the sovereign pilot orchestrating the mission. And that historical midnight ride maps perfectly to what modern developers in the source material call a deterministic 581-kilometer digital strike. The underlying structure of execution hasn't changed at all, literally just the technology has. Which brings us to Section 3, the 1689 breach. To truly grasp the scale of this technological power grab, we have to look at the sociology of computation through a much wider historical lens. Looking at these historical dates reveals a deeply cyclical sociological battle over infrastructural power, and it is fascinating. The sources point to historical milestones like the 1648 Treaty of Westphalia and the 1689 Orange Pledge. These were crucial moments where local actors pushed back against the absolute power of kings, and this leads directly to the physical assertion of the 1775 Midnight Ride. The pattern is super clear. Centralized powers continuously attempt to enclose resources and strip away local autonomy, which forces local actors to relentlessly fight back and break out. And that brings us to today. The sources warn that we're currently hurtling toward a 2026 great enclosure of cloud AI. By forcing you to rely entirely on opaque cloud APIs, centralized tech giants are severing the link between your human intent and the underlying hardware. They intercept, they moderate, and they meter your logic. If they control that red brick substrate we talked about earlier, your intent is just floating in the ether, and they effectively liquidate your true authorship. Section 4. Becoming the Sovereign Pilot. Okay, so how exactly do we break free from this digital enclosure and stop paying this royal tax? It all builds into an actionable workflow. The source is called Chopsticks engineering. It's a strict 3-step process to bypass that cloudy AI fog, utilizing a secure command line interface as an agentic typewriter. First, secure the physical substrate, meaning you own the local hardware, sitting right on your desk. Second, publish your unalterable intent, crafting a bit-perfect mathematical record of exactly what you want to happen. Third, execute locally. You don't ask a centralized API for permission, you command the machine directly. But listen, holding the reins requires actual work. The sources highlight the revival of a historic legal doctrine called the sweat of the brow. Because modern AI is fundamentally probabilistic, it guesses, it creates a massive legal and technical vulnerability for users who just act as moral crumple zones. Basically, humans are just there to take the blame when the AI messes up. So to combat algorithmic distortion, you have to apply physical, manual, and intentional human effort. You have to actively steer the machine, pruning its text and enforcing your commands locally to shield your intent from the chaos of the cloud. That's what? That is your ultimate proof of work. To wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with a highly provocative question to consider regarding your own relationship with our digital infrastructure. As the Great Enclosure attempts to completely wall off your digital reality and force you onto their servers, what are you going to do? Will you passively accept the automated miasma, renting your capabilities as a tenant from an invisible agentic king? Or will you claim your rightful role as an active, sovereign pilot, saddle up your own hardware substrate, and ride? The choice and the execution is entirely yours. Thanks for joining me today. Keep questioning the systems around you, and I'll catch you next time.